plus the active case. I've indicated two regions. That's the Greater Accra region in red and the Ashanti region. What I want to emphasize here is that if you look at COVID-19 quite clearly in Ghana, it is largely an urban phenomenon. It is something which is happening in our big cities. And to a large extent, if you look at the regions which are quite rural, you know, we have recorded very little cases. And I think it's all to do with the issues of congestion, the difficulty in complying with social distancing in our large cities where you have so many people and the density levels in terms of population and households are so high. So I must say that COVID-19 in Ghana is largely an urban phenomenon. And as I've said already and can show you, if you look at the regions which are the least urbanized, those regions in northern Ghana, northern region, upper west, Savannah region, northeast, upper east. And if you look at the active cases as at the moment, it's basically, in fact, in some cases, in some regions, we don't even have active cases any longer. And even if you look at the cumulative cases, they aren't much. But in broadly, Ghana, we've managed to handle the situation very well. If you look at the cases, even though we are not testing as much as we should, but in the broader sense, the situation isn't as bad as it pertains in other parts of the world. And so that is it. But why is the cumulative numbers, that the cases are not too big or not too threatening? It is I think the impact of the pandemic on the socio-economic well-being of the population and economy, which has really been really affected. And because as a result of the lockdown, even though the lockdown, only two metropolitan areas were locked down, it basically affected the whole of the country because the Accra is basically the socio-economic hub of the country, and it's basically the heartbeat of the country. And once you lock it down, basically all the other supply chains are basically broken. And so the impact of the pandemic has really been severe. And also the fact that in Accra, we also have a very large informal sector where many people live on low-income wages. And so when the lockdown happened, and also the fact that our borders are now basically closed, the airport has been completely been shut down for some time, except for emergency flights only. And so the impact has really been great. And Accra being the window of Ghana to the rest of the world, the impact of the pandemic has really been felt, particularly in the areas of the transport sector. We don't have a very good public transport system. What we have is basically what we call the trotros, which is an informal public bus system, structure that we have here. And the lockdown, and also in order to deal with the disease, there was the need to ensure social distancing and so on and so forth. Businesses were shut down, and it affected the transport sector because they were not operating as they should. And even for those who were operating, the capacity of the buses, the minibuses, had to be reduced in order to ensure that the occupants observe some form of social distance. We've also seen, as I've said, because the airport is shut down, the aviation sector, our international airport is now, and we've seen that the hospitality industry, hotels and others have also been hugely affected. Many of our 5-star hotels and 4-star hotels are basically located in Accra, and for weeks and months, many of them were shut down. It is only quite recently that the economy is starting to some measures of the restrictions are beginning to be eased, and some sense of normalcy are beginning to appear. So the hospitality industry, the hotel industry, in the tourism sector, these are areas which have really been affected. And last week, the Minister for Finance gave us an update of the financial situation of the economy, including our GDP. And we expected, before COVID, that for 2020, we're going to grow between 5 to 6% in terms of GDP growth. It is now almost less than 1%. And Accra, which, as I said earlier, is basically the nerve center of Ghana, accounts for almost about 30% of our GDP. And so if our GDP, which is supposed to have grown about 6%, is going to shrink to less than 1%, you can see the impact on the city in terms of economic activity. So to sum up for my 10 minutes, what I would say is that, yes, if you look at Ghana and you compare Ghana to other countries, the numbers in terms of the cumulative cases of COVID-19 isn't as high as we found in other countries. But the impact of the pandemic on the socioeconomic well-being of citizens, as well as the overall national economy, has really, really been huge. And we've just been to, and we don't know when we are going to get out of it. I work at the university, and since March, the universities have shut down. Basically, all educational institutions were shut down. It is only quite recently that the president decided to ease the restrictions on reopening of educational institutions to allow final year students, those who are hesitant, to be able to go back and write their final examinations, and then so that they can exit. So the impact of the pandemic, has really, really, really been huge. And we are yet, as I said, that we don't know when the whole thing is going to end. And so to be able to put fingers on the actual impact will take us some time. Thank you very much. Hello.
Sorry, thanks, George. I just lost my button. Thanks very much, George. That was very, very helpful. Let's go to Ansama, and then we'll begin our discussion. Ansama, are you ready for us?
Yes.
Khani?
Okay.
Great.
Just sharing my presentation. Can you see it?
Yes, we can. Thanks very much. Do you want to make it into presentation mode?
Let me know if I can start or not, okay?
You can start. Can you just make it into the presentation mode?
Oh, okay, for sure.
Thanks. Super.
Okay. First of all, I would like to say good afternoon, good afternoon for everyone in this presentation, in this panel. And I would like also to say thank you for the invitation to participate on this discussion. For that matter, I chose to speak on the market side and to illustrate a bit of the impact of the COVID situation in the market side, in the trade fairs, in the city of Maputo where I live, and where also I have a certain background on analyzing what is going on. So my first slide is to give you, just a brief background on three sides of the story. One in the general micro condition of the city of Maputo. The other one, just some figures on the urban sector itself, and also to measure how climate changes, efforts also are putting pressure in the city. So the city of Maputo is the capital of Mozambique, and if we talk about potentials, I mean, it has the infrastructure network. I mean, it also has a local, regional, and international connectivity. It's a port city. There is an international airport, and in the other hand, also boosts a strong tourism sector attractiveness. And I would also to highlight the concentration in Maputo of tertiary and quaternary services, and also this figure that is shown that 40% of Mozambique, 40% of the Mozambican GDP is produced in Maputo City. So this also gives you a picture of how it plays, this urban area plays in the general context of the country. The city itself, it's prone to different kinds of pressure in terms of climate change, like cyclones, floods. We have problems of air pollution and also erosion, which are derived by the exploitation of mangrove areas and also basing of rivers and efforts of course, because here at the Bay of Maputo you have 3 rivers coming from inland to that place. So the major consequence of the demand of the high growth urbanization on the city of Maputo, it's taking effect in terms of this picture that we have a greater urban dispersion, which is increasing the demand for mobility, and also is giving also a high pressure on the infrastructure of the city to service all this area that is spreading all, in that direction and this direction and also in this direction. So what we feel is that the short density of the city, it's also bringing problems, and we see here now, and it's one of the things that I put in this discussion, that mobility is a huge problem, and also the supply of goods, mainly in public markets, and also trade fairs. And adding that, what is happening in the informal sectors, like the street vendors and also the informal markets. Coming to the speaking, just to give you also a picture of what's going on in the market sector, I structured the problems on this sector in 3 variants. Let's say we have infrastructure problems, which has to deal with bad location of the markets. Most of the markets, they don't have what I call commercial equipment, like adequate means for selling, and we don't. Most of them, they don't have conservation equipment. There is lack of water supply and sanitation services in the markets. Electricity is a problem. Markets there are many markets that they don't have like fencing, and they don't offer securities for the vendors and for the buyers. Mobility it's a problem because there is a tendency that markets are allocated on and the hubs of transportation. So there is a direct connection here with markets and also the transportation hubs. People, like I can say that most of the informal markets, they grow or they born where transport hubs are located. And all these problems of the infrastructure, they derive to an issue that most of the markets, they don't have an attractive infrastructure. Like if they are not buildings that you can be attracted to go. It's just that you always need to go to a market to buy certain goods. We also have management issues dealing with the markets, like there's a growth number of informal vendors, people who are leaving the formal markets to go to the streets. It's a problem. Streets are offering more attractiveness to the vendors. There's lots of policies and policies, regulations to put order on the markets. Tax collection in the markets is a problem. Also, the few markets that they have a tax collection running. Also, this money that is collected, it goes sometimes it's been channeled not to where they should be. So this has an effect of the monetization of the markets. There's no vendors cadastre system, and also we also see a problem on the market's operation times, which it puts a pressure because if just to give an example, here in Maputo we work. Mozambique, the working time is from 8 to 3:30 for the public service, and then some public sector they work to 7:30, and then markets they close at 5:30. Sorry, so you can see that. Arrangement has to be done also to make a markets that to work more efficiently. Sorry. In terms of social aspects, I chose to talk about this dilemma of formal versus informal, and I'll discuss this in the next slide when I discuss the COVID effect on that. And also, we see that the lack of trade fairs that can give an alternative to for the reduced number of markets and the high demand of people to sell their goods, it can be an alternative proposal to deal with this issue. Because if you look at the goods that are sold in the markets, mainly they are agricultural products, and most of them they are not produced all over the year. So it's a problem for like a low-income family to buy to buy a place in the formal market when the product that he sells only occurs in like 3 months in the year. So we need also some kind of innovation to deal with this aspect. So after this, I hope this brief presentation, these brief slides can give you a picture of the sector, the market sectors and trade fairs in Maputo. I selected. I went to see what was the strategy of the municipality, and I put I interviewed the manager of the city to see what are the strategy that they are doing, and I also tried to discuss that to see if the measures that are put in place are efficient to deal with the COVID-19. And on the top of that, you can see the figures of the COVID situation in Mozambique today, okay, 4th of August. So the municipality of Maputo has two main, they appoint two main fields to deal with the issue of trading and informal trade in the city of Maputo. One is the government started last year to deal with the new infrastructure to the markets and try to improve the condition of the markets. In parallel on trying to design a master plan for markets and trade fairs. So this was an ongoing process. On the other hand, we also saw, many campaigns to take out street vendors in downtown of Maputo and to reallocate them to different markets, okay? Like in 2 months or 3 months before the COVID, occurred impacted in the city. So in terms of informal markets, there was also a discussion with the stakeholders, which also see as a good, positive approach to discuss with the leaders of association of markets and how they want their markets organized. But then in March, there was the impact of the COVID, and we saw all the change of the picture on this approach. First of all, what we saw, it was like the mitigation measures, like sanitation of the markets. They reduced the number of people, of street vendors in the markets, and in the formal markets, they try to shut down some and to reallocate vendors to different places. But here now is where most of the problem lives on. So I can say, if you saw that figure, like more than 50% of the population, their means of subsistence, they come from the informal sector. So in the markets, they play a major, an important role in this picture. So the municipality or the governing body on this process is facing a dilemma on surviving of the people, and also if the status quo is leave it like that, I mean, you will increase the number of community contamination. So I mean, this is a challenge. It's something that it's still it's ongoing. There's no a final decision on how this will end up. And we also saw in the news, like in the past days, that in some areas of the downtowns, the street vendors, they went back. So I mean, I don't have theories on how to solve this. This is to promote a discussion, to listen to what are the case scenarios in other cities. Here in our university, we are working in assisting the central government on the production of a guidance on how these master plans for the markets can be done, or can be assisted. And saying that, I would like to end up here and say thank you for your attention.
Super, thanks so much, Professor Kani. I'm going to just invoke my Rusty's chair and just ask a couple of points of discussion for my two panelists. Just raise two things that I'd like some clarification on from both of you. The one, Professor Owusu, thank you very much, but I was wondering if you could describe to us in a little bit more detail, what has been the state's response in Accra to COVID? Have they instituted lockdowns? Have they instituted, what kinds of measures have been instituted? And also to try and get a sense of what has been the response from residents in Accra. Have they been compliant? Have they not? What's been the relationship between the state and state's responses and residents within the cities? And equally, Professor Kani, you've given us some idea, but could you also just to give us a bit more of a sense of the detail of what's actually unfolded within Maputo? So I was just hoping if my FoTC speakers could clarify those points. Could we start with Professor Owusu?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think if you look at Ghana, even though we have a decentralized development framework, it is basically top-down driven. In that the central government has a strong, what you call, hold on how cities are governed and managed. Basically, in Ghana, mayors are appointed by the president, and so it gives you a sense of the level of influence of central government when it comes to how cities are governed and managed. And so, if you look with COVID COVID-19, I think the response from government has basically been threefold, if I can put it that way. One, the strategy has been to test and then isolate. And then the second approach has been to enforce public adherence to social distancing and hygiene protocols. And then third is the mandatory wearing of masks, including where there's non-compliance, you can be punished, even including going to jail. And so this has been the approach, and it's all basically top-down driven. The policy initiatives as to the strategies are made by the central government, and then city authorities have to enforce. We've seen the army on the street to enforce the wearing of masks. It is now, as I said, mandatory that once you step out of your house, there's an existing law that says that once you step out of your house and you are in the public space, you have to put on the mask. And you will have the police and other security agencies enforcing. To a large extent, citizens have, to a large extent, comply with the directives. Today, even in our informal markets, with the congestion, and you still go there and people are putting on the mask. You see people in front of shops, small shops, having what you call the Veronica bucket with water, with sanitizers. That once shoppers are coming in, you have to wash your hands, sanitize your hand before you enter the shop. So those directives have largely been complied with. The state has also been doing a lot of fumigation of markets. It's all coming from the state, and so what I would say is that many of the responses and the strategy put forward by the state, to a large extent, have been complied by citizens.
Great, thank you, Professor Wusu. Professor Kani, could you come in on those questions?
Okay. I mean, I don't think we are different on what was reported by Professor George Wusu. And just to add, I mean, what is what I've been seeing happening is that there is a sense that the population also are trying to put on place measures that can help them to avoid having problem with official authorities. What I'm saying is that if you go to a market, although they know that the market administration or the municipality doesn't have sanitation, doesn't have didn't provide masks, the vendors themselves, they are organizing. I mean, they're doing their best effort to put on place those measures. So markets that have strong, they are pushing also the government. I mean, I would like to bring the picture not from the view of the governance body of the municipality, but what are the initiatives of the communities or the population on association, what they are doing in terms of the measures to deal with the COVID. Like Mozambique was in lockdown level 3 for 4 months since the eclosion of the COVID, and that ended I think 5 days ago. The emergency stage of the country. So it ended 5 days ago, and we are in a period now that the parliament is studying what will come next. So, just to give an example, in the transport sector, there was almost a shutdown on the transport sector, but then after 2-3 days, the Transport Association, they made a strong pressure on the government, and transport were allowed also. I mean, first in the first stage with the minimum passengers, but then I mean there was no way that this will work. So the situation now is that people are using the transport, but masks are mandatory. So the government, like here, the government, municipal government is elected. What we see is that there are sectors of activities like the transport sector, like the markets and others that also put a lot of pressure on government to balance whatever are the measures that are being given to cope with the COVID situation. But as I said before, it's for me a very difficult to make conclusion on what is good, what is not good, because this is a situation that's ongoing. It's an ongoing phenomenon, and I mean, day by day we see different scenarios on what's happening. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. I think this question of the dilemmas, the kind of wicked problems which are facing us at the moment are incredibly difficult to grapple with. And I was very pleased that you raised this issue, Professor Khani, of kind of grassroots responses and what was happening at the level of communities' own initiatives. Have you seen that as well, Professor Wusu? Have you seen communities raising, assisting, or thanks, sorry, I've got an assistant myself. Have you seen grassroots responses and initiatives taking place in Accra?
Yeah, I think I would say that COVID has really exposed the resilience of our Ghanaians. For example, at the beginning, when government was going to make what you call a mask mandatory, I think the first question on the media was, will the government be able to provide enough masks for everybody? And then all of a sudden, we saw how our dressmakers and those in the fashion industry started coming up with what you call a mask. So today, that is no longer an issue. We saw when government, I can't remember when an announcement was made that we need to have sanitizers at home, at various places. You know, all of a sudden there was a shortage of sanitizers in the system. Within a few days, we've seen Ghanaians producing sanitizers. And so a lot of grassroots initiatives have come up, and it's quite interesting. When we went under lockdown, what we saw was that a lot of businesses decided to go online. Restaurants, even those who sell at the market, some of them decided to go on Facebook and then put up their telephone numbers and other things. And then they indicated how, if you need tomatoes, if you need onions or whatever, they can get to deliver to you in your house. So there have been a lot of initiatives from the grassroots, which has really shown a lot of urgency on the part of citizens. So, and in the educational sector, we've seen schools closed down. Now, some schools are beginning to go online to provide tuition to students. And so there are a number of initiatives which have come up, which is quite refreshing, and it's quite because at the beginning, it was all about would government be able to provide ABCD? But what we've seen is that citizens have taken things into their own hands, and to a large extent, we've managed to survive the last 6 months with COVID in a very, very, with very innovative ways and means of going by.
Fascinating. Thanks both Professor Kani and Professor Wusu. I mean, I of course have about 3 million more questions, but at this point, I think I would like to open it up to the floor, and ask our attendees: have you got any questions, points of discussion? Please, if you do, raise your hand, and I'll come to you, or post your question into the chat, and I can read it out if you don't feel like speaking. So, any questions or comments? Not seeing any hands. Have I missed anything? Right. No problem. Then I shall continue with one of my next questions. Professor Wusu, you mentioned that the army and police have been very involved in enforcement, and I was wondering whether that's raised any concerns in Accra, in Ghana at all. And equally, Professor Kani, you mentioned that there are plans afoot to think about the response. Are there worries about what's going to happen post-COVID, or concerns about what's going to happen once all this is over? So we start with Professor Kani this time. Sorry, I don't think Professor Kani, do you want to respond, or should Professor Wusu take on the question?
Okay, I can try my best well, I think that the post-COVID, if we think on the measures, what would be the consequence? It would all depend on the financial capacity of the governments to deal on what will come next. I can give you an example on what I'm saying. In Mozambique, schools are closed, and so far there was the last evaluation of the emergency state. It was decided that the school will reopen, but then the government realized that with the current situation of the current condition of our schools, like primary and secondary schools, and even university, it's impossible to implement a mitigation plan. So it's impossible to let the students back to school under the current situation. So what was decided is to implement an emergency plan to build new toilets and sanitation infrastructure for, in the first stage, 600 schools all over the country. But the problem on that measure is that it will take, the government want this measure to be implemented in three months. But we know that it will not be, even in 6 months it will be in place. So if we look at the sector that I'm discussing, like the markets, it's impossible to say that we can put measures in place that traders and suppliers and buyers can work together in a hygienic or more safe situation, because the conditions are not there. Okay, I think that the issue of COVID is being addressed as a health problem, yes, But in terms of looking to the infrastructure, it will cost a lot of money that the government doesn't have I mean, I think in this case, the municipal government doesn't have to rearrange the infrastructure of vendors in the city of Maputo. So this is a challenge. I'm afraid, I have to say that, I'm afraid that if COVID was to finish today, we will go back to the previous conditions. Because what will come, I mean, I don't think there's capacity to deal with it so far in this current situation. I'm sorry, I'm being so negative on that, but I don't see it like happening in that way. Thank you.
Yeah. Can I go ahead?
Yes, yes, please do.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Yeah, I think the use of the army, there was some concern at the initial stage during the lockdown phase, where there was a total lockdown of basically the whole of Accra, and only essential service operators were allowed to go out. So during those times, we did see there were some concerns with the army, and there were even videos on WhatsApp and on Facebook about some excessive use of force by the military. But beyond that, I think the use of the army and the police for the rest of the time, for the period of the pandemic, I think citizens have been quite accommodating. I think there has been a lot of education and sensitization on radio about the disease. And so many people are now very much aware of the disease and its consequences, even though we still see the cases coming up. Like I told you earlier, from just a single case on March 12th, this after 5 months, we are now getting to closer to 40,000 cases. But like I said, at the initial stage, when the soldiers and the army, the military and the police were put on the street, there was some concern, particularly in the informal the slums, and then the informal settlements. And I quite remember there was one case where somebody resisted. He was told to get in, and he resisted, and unfortunately the army opened fire and the person lost his life. So initially there were some concerns, but by and large citizens have been quite they've tolerated the army to a large extent.
Great, thanks very much. We've got a couple of hands up, so I'll go first to Liza and then to Phil, and then I've got some questions to read out. Liza, do you want to ask a question?
Sure, thanks, Marco. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, thank you guys so much for both of the presentations. Really, really interesting. I wanted to follow up with something that was raised a bit earlier, which was about the relationship between national government and local governments. And I'm wondering if either of you would be willing to speak on any sort of tensions which have shored up between the way in which the central government wants to deal with the state of emergency and the imperatives or the concerns at the local level. So yeah, just wondering if that's come up at all. I know in the South African context, there's been incredible political tensions around the sort of tendency to centralize. So yeah, thanks a lot.
Sorry, Professor, please go ahead.
I have a related question. In South Africa, we have a Disaster Management Act, which was state of the art. It set up this elaborate system for structuring an institutional response to disasters with a national disaster management center cascading through a provincial to a district local disaster management center. But when the disaster struck, we found out that this whole structure had been under-resourced, under-capacitated. It didn't report through to the presidency. It reported through to an individual ministry, and it was unable to provide the institutional architecture to respond to the crisis. And so national government set up a whole new set of structures, a national command center, a national command council with a command center, and then provincial and district command centers and other support structures. I won't go into the details. But, and that's because our state-of-the-art system, which we thought would handle the crisis, just wasn't able to. And so my question is, can you talk to the institutional structures that have been set up to manage the crisis? And I'm also very interested to hear the response to Lisa's question, whether in the system there have been tensions across the levels of government.
Great, thanks, Phil. Please go ahead, professors. Professor Wusu, do you want to start?
Okay, yeah. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me start with the first question about whether there's a tension between national government and local government. Like I told you earlier on, I mean, the system of the governance structure that we have in Ghana at the moment is basically top down, and to a large extent, central governments have central government has a very strong influence on city governments, and you know that, including the fact that even the mayors are appointed. They are not, in our case, mayors are not appointed. Sorry, are not elected. They are appointed by the president, and so the sort of tension which possibly we would have had, where you have city government that quote unquote are independent. In our case, we don't have something like that. So so the relationship between what the point I'm going to make, that the pre-COVID and the COVID era, the relationship between city governments haven't changed. National governments still have very strong influence on city governments, and so in this era, basically much of the strategy to deal with the pandemic has basically come from the national governments, and city governments are supposed to implement this. So in our case, we haven't had that sort of tension, largely due to the strong influence of central government on local government. The other second question I would like to address is whether, in the case of Ghana, before COVID, we had other structures in place to deal with disasters. Yes, we had in Ghana, we have what we call the National Disaster Management Authority. But what the scenario that the person who asked the question painted about South Africa is actually what prevails in Ghana. We now have what we call the National COVID Task Force, which is chaired by the president, and then with other sector central government agencies involved. So basically, this is the sort of structure, and so everything is basically done in a very top-down fashion. Policies are formulated at the very top, and city governments are supposed to implement without any question or so. So that's the structure that we have in Ghana.
Very helpful. Thank you, Professor Wusu. Professor Kani, do you want to respond to those questions?
Okay. Here in Mozambique, Of course, we have a national disaster response body that deals with natural disasters. And I mean, mainly they have capacity to deal with natural disasters like floods and tropical storms and so on. But in this case of COVID, COVID is being dealt, or the mandate of dealing with the COVID, with this health situation, is the Institute for National Health, which is a body that is within the Ministry of Health. They are the ones who are dealing with the testing, also with the protocols to deal with the COVID. All the protocols that are in place or that are being implemented by local governments like municipalities, they are the command body is the National Institute of Health.
Okay. Great, thank you very much. Yeah. Okay, so I'm just going to Sarah's question. So Professor Sarah Charlton was asking whether there is pressure for social welfare payments and whether this is being offered in Mozambique and in Ghana. How much is being offered for how long? Since in South Africa there's been a push for government grants and a response by government in offering a small emergency grant. But lots of reported problems in accessing the grant. So some unhappiness about this. It has, however, led to further pressure for long-term universal basic income grants, now supposedly under discussion. So I was just wondering, I think Sarah was just wondering if you could respond to this question around social welfare. Let's start with Professor.
Well, what I've been reading from the media, or what is coming to my attention, is that there's more pressure from the formal sector, like tertiary services, banks, and industries, to ask for loans for government than the population. I mean, the majority of the population themselves. I mean, I've not heard that a group of population have asked any support from the government. But we almost every day we hear our commercial associations and the industry association asking for the relief of taxes. And I mean, I think this pressure exists, but in upper level sectors of the economy.
Right.
Okay. For Ghana, before COVID, there's this what do you call the livelihood empowerment grants, which were being given to very poor households. Those grants have continued in the COVID era, but what the government has done in terms of trying to reduce the impact of the pandemic on citizens was to provide free water for households. It was initially for 3 months, and it has now been extended for additional 3 months. But the challenge here is that you have to be connected to the Ghana Water Company's system. Otherwise, you don't get the benefit. And we know that in many of our informal settlements, households are not connected to the national water system. And so in that case, if they have to buy from water vendors, then they are not going to get the full benefit of the this initiative. There's also the issue. Another area where the government has also tried to reduce the burden of citizens was that when the pandemic struck in March, government took the decision that it was going to absorb 50% of the cost of electricity for households and businesses. So for 3 months, we basically pay 50% of our electricity, because the argument there was that because people were at home, they were going to use more electricity. And so there was the need for the state to come in. So that is it. Subsequently, that initiative has been extended for another 3 months for the very poor households who use very limited electricity. So basically, these are some of the things. And then also, there has also been discussion with the banks to sort of for people who have to pay back loans, for the bank to do something about that. But beyond that, in terms of payment of actual incomes to household, that is not that is yet to happen in the case of Ghana.
Great, thank you, professors. I have a question that's come up through the chat from Thomas Betchart, sorry if I mispronounced your surname. Says, do you believe that the sudden necessity to improvise organization in the spheres of urban organization, planning, education, socioeconomic activities, such as the move to digital technologies, will leave a sustainable impact for the future and spur innovation? And do you have any examples of this? I think, Professor Owusu, you were alluding to some of this earlier. Do you want to pick up that point?
Can you repeat the question again, please?
It's actually in the chat, but the question was, do you believe that the sudden necessity to improvise organization in spheres of urban organization, planning, education, socioeconomic activities, such as the move to digital technologies, will leave a sustainable impact for the future and spur innovation? And do you have any examples? From what I'm picking up, the question's really trying to see whether the changes that have been made in a whole bunch of sectors are going to continue into the future or not, and if you have any examples. Sorry, Thomas, if you want to clarify, you're very welcome to.
I think what I see happening, for example, I gave the example earlier on about schools being closed, and now attempts by some schools to try to teach, to go online, to provide tuition for students. We at the university, we've done that. In fact, when the COVID situation came up, we were left with some weeks to complete the semester. But because the universities were closed, in order to be able to complete the semester, we were told to go online. And some basic schools, there was an attempt by government to use radios and television stations to provide some sort of teaching or learning for kids. I think these are things that which I believe that even in the post-COVID era, some of this innovation and the use of technology are going to be with us for some time. We've seen, I've made mention of the fact that now there's a lot of online marketing and trading. I see this thing, I see these initiatives as something that will have last, the COVID era. So, particularly the use of technology in our everyday lives. So, it is something that I believe that beyond COVID, we will still be seeing some of these initiatives.
Thanks very much. Professor Khani, some innovations that you may have seen? Sorry, I have a co-chair with me at the moment.
Okay. Well, in this particular moment, like in Maputo, or what I see in other cities in Mozambique, we are not in stage of planning. In terms of putting in place tools for planning in order to face the situation. I think we are more in a stage of reaction or stage of mitigation effects. I think it's still to come where a time whereby we will have to plan better our cities in that direction. But so far, the measures that have been implemented they are to react for this pandemic situation. Like it's an emergency now. It's like if you have a fire, then you face the fire, and then after that you see what is going to happen next. I believe that there's a need to prepare measures that will change the whole paradigm of urban governance because of the efforts of the COVID. At the moment, I think all the measures are, sorry the repetition, are more emergency mitigation tools that are in place.
Great, thanks. Yes, it's interesting to see the comparison between the two contexts. We have one more question in the chat from Bogane. He says, with regards to transport, excuse me. With regards to transport, are people allowed to travel across provinces in Mozambique and Ghana? So that was the question that was posed in the chat. Do you want to start, Professor Owusu?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yes, since the lifting of the lockdown, people can move across provinces or across regional lines. But now the requirement is that if you are going to board the bus, then you have to you have to wear a mask. Otherwise, the transport company or whoever will not allow you to board the bus. And I've seen cases, even travel on the highways, where you have sometimes the police stopping cars to see who is wearing masks and who is not wearing masks. So yes, you can travel across regional boundaries, but you have to wear your mask.
Super. And the situation in Mozambique, Professor Kani?
It's the same. Wearing masks is mandatory in public transportation. So, but, I mean, you can travel all over the country. Transports are continuing. In the first weeks, I mean, they stop at transportation, but now you are allowed to use public transport, but you have to use a face mask.
Great. Are there any other questions or comments? Have I missed anyone? Okay. My co-chair is saying that I haven't missed anyone, which is very helpful, but I was just checking. Okay, if there are no more comments, questions, then I think I'll just move toward wrapping up the session. By saying thank you, that's been incredibly helpful in terms of gaining some insights into the two other contexts, particularly no, excuse me one second. So I'd just like to thank our speakers very much, and particularly the insights that we've been offered into the nature of governance, the kinds of top-down approaches and then enforcement, and also the very different kinds of concerns that we've seen in the different contexts. So very big thank you to Professor Owusu, and very big thank you to Professor Kani, and I'm sure we'll be engaging on other matters in the future. And take care of yourselves in these very, very strange and dangerous times. Thanks everyone for attending. And just to mention that we have our seminar next week, which is the CSP, there we go, the City Support Program at National Treasury by the full CSP team. And they will be holding a panel discussion entitled Taking Forward the City Reform Agenda Within the Current Social and Economic Climate. So we hope you'll join us for that. In the meantime, thank you, Professor Kani. Thank you, Professor Owusu. We appreciate your time and your insight.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Margaret. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for your attention.
Great, thanks so much. Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.